Good morning, everyone. I hope that the first session was wonderful and stimulating, and this is definitely going to be wonderful. I'm Emma Koval, I'm President of 4S, and I would like to welcome you to the Presidential Plenary. Our plenary today is entitled Hili Naʻi Hili Hewa on Fantasies, Broken Things and the Redistribution of Epistemic Authority. In this conversation, a philosopher, an activist geographer, and an eco-hydrologist share their work to cultivate Kanaka Oiwi flourishing amidst the continuing legacies of US imperialism and militarism. Legacies that include the dominant structures of academia. Struggles of colonial control and capture dominate attempts to ameliorate the toxic effects of pollution, militarism, and tourism. In this panel, Kanaka Oiwi and allied scholars mobilise decolonial scientific practices and Hawaiian knowledge to build new worlds that challenge and subvert the white gaze and structures of power. Different futures can emerge in spaces where colonial occupation of sea, sky, land, and ecologies of knowledge are interrupted. Since the time that we conceived of this panel, Hawaii has faced yet another disaster in the wildfires that ravaged Maui and Hawaii Islands and particularly devastated the town of Lahaina. Contributing factors to the fires include drought, extreme weather, and invasive weeds. For many Kanaka Maoli, these disasters were yet another chapter in the ongoing and interlinked disasters of US imperialism, extractive capitalism, and climate change. For many, disaster studies and Indigenous studies may not seem intuitively connected. Disaster studies has been an important subfield of STS for some years, and some of its most important scholars are here at this conference. But as Potawatomi scholar Kyle Powis-White and others have described, the contemporary experience of being Indigenous is to have already lived through many kinds of apocalypse. Living Indigenous knowledges have been shaped by the ending of worlds. White observed in 2016, drawing on Daniel Wildcat, that climate change, quote, is less about the spectre of a new future and more like the experience of déjà vu. What he refers to as the epistemology of crisis, the unbearable newness that accompanies settler colonial narratives, quote, mask numerous forms of power, including colonialism, imperialism, capitalism, patriarchy, and industrialisation. We will explore these themes as we speak about fantasies, broken things, and the redistribution of epistemic authority as they relate to Hawaiian sovereignty, life, and land. Each of our speakers today will present a provocation to get the conversation going. Towards the end, we will have a Q&A, so please note your questions down and make your way to the microphones when we get to that part of the discussion to share your questions. And finally, before I introduce our speakers, I want to acknowledge the work of Misria Sheikh Ali in bringing these amazing scholars together, and for Misria and our speakers for generously participating in discussions leading up today. So yeah, for Misria. So our first speaker I'll introduce, and they will come and join us on stage. Bruce Kaimi Watson is from the island of Oahu. He is an Oiwi philosopher and historian in an occupied nation, and his research swims in the areas of Oiwi philosophy as captured in Mo'olelo and the history of Hawaii, especially the history of education. His current research research focuses on agnotology in a Hawaiian and Pacific context. Next, we will have Bruce. Aurora Kagawa Viviani is an assistant professor with the University of Hawaii at Manoa's Water Resources Research Centre and Department of Geography and Environment, and currently serves on the Hawaii Commission on Water Resource Management. She applies the lens of change to study how plant and human communities are affected by and affect hydrologic processes. Her research focuses on vegetation-water interactions and the ecohydrology of biotic invasions and ecological restoration, with a growing emphasis understanding on urban ecosystems and waterscapes through community science, citizen science, and collaboration with social scientists at the intersection of socio-hydrology and hydrosocial paradigms. Her current challenge is wrestling with ways to better engage the aspirations of local communities to drive vigorous and novel research in the transdisciplinary space encompassing plants, water, and people. That's Bruce. You can see it's actually him. And finally, our third member of the panel is Kyle Kajihiro, an assistant professor of ethnic studies at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, where he earned his doctorate in geography. In 2020-21, Dr. Kajihiro was an ACLS Emerging Voices Fellow at the Institute for Research in the Humanities at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. His research interests include the political geography and political ecology of US imperialism and militarism in Hawaii and the Pacific region, Indigenous, decolonial and counter-militarization social movements, and critical land and culture-based pedagogies for creating archipelagic solidarities. He formerly directed the American Friends Service Committee Hawaii Area Program, and as a board member of Hawaii Peace and Justice, he works with communities in Hawaii and around the Pacific region to counter militarism and environmental injustice, and leads the Hawaii Detours project. So I will hand to Bruce to get us started off.
E aloha e anau I kuhaku, e kalokaloa e anau I kuhewa, e kalako anau I kuhewa, e kalokaloa e anau I kuakua, e vehe mai hoi oi paai hemo. He hala ka uhewa nui a oi kuakua, he hala e paha, he hala I paha, he hala kapa paha, he hala malo paha, he hala kanawai hoi hiki paha, he o lelo a he pua a hua paha na kawaha. He a kahala, I nao kahala ia, vehi ia ke kua, vehi ia ke alo, vehi e pau ka po ino me ka haumia, e oala hoi au kau pula pula. E kane I luna, e kane I lalo, kane loa, o kane poko, o kane ku I koeke, o kane ku I ke kala, e kala I ka make ana ana, e kala I na make a paa, e oala hoi au. Aloha. In saying this pule aloud, you begin by asking to be made aware of all your wrongs. Immediately following this is a request for these errors, these wrongs, these hurts, not just to be forgiven, but to first and more importantly, for them to be exposed and understood. This pule is a celebration of the knowledge and wisdom which comes through a thorough and open examination of Hewa. The careful consideration of Hewa is necessary for the individual and community to thrive. E ola ho'i au, e ola ho'i kākou. The Oiwi philosophy which shapes this pule was depended upon by the native population to thrive on these islands. As a consequence of the occupation of Hawaii by the United States and the subsequent genocide, linguicide, and epistemicide experienced by Kanaka Oiwi, Haole philosophies currently inform and influence the decisions being made by the belligerent government, its institutions, and way too many of the residents of Hawaii. For Haole philosophies to now dominate and determine what is known in Hawaii space, a concomitant Haole ignorance must be present. Haole ignorance provides space for Haole philosophies to infiltrate and flourish outside of continental boundaries by encouraging the displacement of epistemic authority. Haole philosophy's preference to position foreigners as knowers and foreign beliefs as knowledge in native spaces increases the distance from where epistemic authority ought to be based on kuleana, pilina, and ike, conferring instead epistemic authority upon the malihini mahaoi. The devaluation of pilina, kuleana, and ike when determining knower and knowledge in Hawaii encourages historical amnesia. Mo'olelo no longer mo'o, and olelo that doesn't mo'o is just noise. An ahistorical existence facilitates the ability for Hawaii residents to forget, neglect, and ignore the damage left in Haole ignorance's wake, as well as who and what is primarily at fault. Haole ignorance and its support of Haole philosophies in native space produces and reifies the present economic inequality and insecurity experienced on these islands. We are currently in a situation where the Haole philosophies which caused the 2023 Lahaina wildfires are also being depended upon by the officials of the American government and leaders of American business and industry to guide decisions following this tragedy. Ike Oiwi tells us that ola comes from exposing hewa and analyzing each hewa thoroughly. Today, we will be talking about the Lahaina wildfires, attending specifically to the role of Haole ignorance as not just the source, but also the accelerant for the fires. The goal of breathing sound again into this pain, into this tragedy, is to learn from hewa and to perhaps demonstrate the need for a redistribution and return of philosophies which enable epistemic authority to include natives and Oiwi ways of knowing. Oiwi belong to Hawaii. Oiwi belong to Hawaii. The data which comes from being long in Hawaii space, pilina, kuleana, ike, aloha, are necessary for all to thrive on these islands again. My dear friends, while it may be true that ignorance is bliss, I would like to point out that death is bliss as well. In Hawaii, we know that although the careful consideration of hewa may be both painful and unsettling, he ho'olohe ke ola, he ho'okuli kamake, to listen, to hear, to process, to consider, to open, is the path to thrive. To purposefully silence oneself and isolate oneself from stimulation is the path of destruction. This line on the left with the yellow cloud comes from a mo'olelo. E noho o kou me ke aloha me ka olu olu, a nāna aku, a nāna mai, a nā kikahi ka olelo malaila e ho'olohe aku ai. Ai nāna I nā kupuna akua o kāko o e o ko a pauloa ke noho nei ma ke ia mau aina. Please stay here with aloha and olu olu, with care and pleasantness. Attend to others and allow yourself to be attended to. If someone is communicating, listen to them, give them your attention, and attend to the cycles and systems which support life for as long as you live on these islands. Here on is a QR code for a testimony of a video that we're going to watch. The testimony of Uilani Tevanga. And Aurora will be giving you the context of this testimony and why it's here and why, again, he ho'olohe ke ola, he ho'okuli kamake.
Mahalo kaimi. So what will follow is a short 10-minute clip from a testifier, Uilani Tevanga, whose family and lost their home in the Lahaina fire. But what was exceptional was she was one of dozens and dozens of testifiers in the September 2023 Water Commission meeting that followed a number of tumultuous events, which I will unpack later. But what I really wanted to do here was, I am not of Maui. I am not intimate to the issues there, but U'ilani and the many, many testifiers are, and we wanted to be able to bring their voices to this space, and she gave us permission to do so. And so, with that, oh, here, okay. Yeah, please listen.
Uli, and then Mikiawa. And then after that, I have Darylyn and Anson.
Aloha, my name is U'ilani Tevanga, and I am a Lahaina mother of 5, one of the thousands of families who lost everything, one of the thousands whose life is now in ash. And yet, it is from the ash that I see clearer than I ever have. And I first want to mahalo, even though she's not here, Auntie U'ilani Kapu, because my whole mana'o, and I'm not wearing red, but my daughter, who's 16, has had a love for Kiha Wahine for years and has felt her activations for years. And she asked me to wear this today. And it is in that spirit of Wahine energy who activates all of us back to what is most important. Kiha Wahine is calling to all of us, not just in Lahaina, but across Pai'aina, to restoration and reclamation. And the imbalance that has happened, and I apologize for anyone who takes offense, because we've forgotten the Wahine in all of this. It has been dominated by the male decisions. It has come from wounded masculine and wounded greed, where all of this began, where we started to have these Judeo-Christianity colonized mindset around what was important and what was not. When it was our kupuna who understand that life force energy is feminine. And it was Kiha Wahine who carried the mana of the people of Lahaina. And one of the books that I was reading prior to the fire, it was called The Sacred Places of Lahaina. And it was actually one of the puke that our kumu Punana Leo had lent to us. One of the ancient names of Lahaina is Laha'aina Loa, meaning land of prophecy. Why was it that Lahaina was the center for our ali'i? Why did they pick that place? Because it's a portal, much like a wahine is a portal between two worlds. And so these spiritual conversations that have been left out of the science and the politics is the reason why I feel like we are here today. And I had not planned on sharing that because I guess that is very odd, especially in a state building. But if you connect to the land and you connect to the natural cycles of death and rebirth and regeneration, you understand, much like the cycles of a wahine body. I thank you for not taking lightly that so many of us flew from Lahaina during such a time of pain. And in these 2 minutes, I won't say anything that you haven't already heard because this plight is ancient. So what I will say is this. After your life is completely shattered, everything becomes simple. And there are 2 questions that I find myself asking with each step. What is the purpose? And what is this in service to? What is the purpose that Peter Martin and Greg Tremble petitioned you in a time of collapse and suffering? What or who was it in service to? Was it in service to the collective or to their future assets? Was it in service to truth or their narrative? What was it in service to? So many outsiders want to point fingers how it all happened. For those hearing this, know that it is not hard. This has been waiting to happen for generations because the pleas of the community to restore the streams and restore the water has continued to fall on deaf ears and has compromised all of us, supported by the powers that be. With each passing generation, with each past gentleman estate under the guise of agriculture lands. So again, what is the purpose of the petition? And was it in service to future prevention? Was it in service to healing the land, which should be our only focus right now? Or was it in service to their own pockets? And like Kale shared, let me quote Peter Martin in a recent interview to the Washington Post, which he said that there are restrictions which prevent him from farming or doing his developments on the land he owns. And also that the truth is, I believe that God was angry, Martin said, that these lands were not being used as God intended. This is who is in control of most of the water in West Maui. Does this God prefer water to be used for many infinity pools over sustainable farming, which feeds the community? As one of the wealthiest individuals in Hawaii, he has had many chances to restore stream flows, but chooses over and over again to put his company over the community. And that is the painful story of Lahaina, and that is the story of Hawaii. A separation of those who think for deep profit and those who are pleading for protection to what is rightfully, ancestrally ours. This tragic thing that we are now living through, that my children wake up with nightmares from, who have lost classmates in a young age in elementary, kupunas who can't even drive to the other side of the island because they've only ever known Lahaina. This is the reality, and it is simple. That even our keiki understand that taking care of our streams, restoring the natural flow from Ukumehame through Honokahau should be paramount to the restoration of our community. So I challenge, no matter what the water code may say, that we go a little further and we push back on this 25 to 30%. How can we sustain? How can we restore with 25%? Last night when I was getting ready to come here, and Uncle Kiamoku talks about moku ula, restoring moku hinia. And it says right here that the crown ownership of this parcel, moku hinia TMK 2467 Part 2, was assumed by the Republic of Hawaii in 1893, and then the territory, and then the state of Hawaii for the use of County of Maui Parks and Rec. We're not asking for moku ula to be restored. We are saying it is going to be restored. It was stolen. And once the water diversion happened, this is where we are. Today, I flew in for my children because for the past decade or so, I have been testifying alongside with them and much of their kumus who have taught them in this room. We are not here for our own interests. We are in service to our community and the survival of our lands and our streams and our beaches. And I can't be everywhere. But when it comes to Lahaina, I gather my babies in that car and we show up. It is such a gift that my 9-year-old can identify what a o'opu is, no matter where she is. And I mahalo Archie and Kai for providing those opportunities to have real life learning that our family, even though I didn't grow up on Maui, my lineal ties are specifically for Lahaina, Ukumehame, and Ka'anapali. And that brings me back home. That is my ho'ikapiko moment. Everyone outside of Lahaina is saying that they want to help us heal. What do you need? What do you need? Let us know what you need. If you are listening to this, we need voices. We need water to return. We are not here for our own interests. As you have heard, And I want to share that as a trauma-informed facilitator in the work that I do, healing only comes when safety is created. And as you have heard, Kaleo Manuel brought that safety net to so many. It spoke to the community that after all this work, you are now safe. So I don't want to hear about healing until we can provide safety, until in our bodies, we can know that what we build is not going to burn. Justice for place like Kahoma Valley. We are demanding our voices be heard. We're demanding the Water Commission to continue to uphold the state water code, investigate West Maui land, not just by talking with them, but by coming out to Lahaina, learning from our people, listening to the wisdom. Who better to steer this forward than those who have ties here for thousands of years and are pili with each part of its natural cycles. We are in this mess because of the generations of continued greed and zero accountability to that which was done to our land and waters. And I hope that the commission will also reflect on the simple questions that I have posed today. What is the purpose? And what are we in service to? And know that with all that has been said, no matter the amount of pushback we face, we will be here at every point until the waters flows as it once did. Until we see the waters flow once more into Mokuhinia. Until Moku'ula is restored, our spiritual center, our piko, we will be here. And my 16-year-old daughter texted me just as I was sitting there. She's like, Mom, can you please add that the Kawa'ula stream fed Mokuhinia and Peter Martin is holding the water that can restore our piko. This is 16-year-old. Moku'ula, which is needed to be restored as well for the healing of our people and community. So, eola maui komohana, e ho'i kanani moku'ula, eola I kawai.
She's amazing.
I was supposed to follow that. How do I make this? Sorry, guys. This one? Okay. Oh, I pushed the wrong button. Sorry. So I will, there were 12, it was a 12-hour long meeting. But U'ilani's, oops. How do we get out of Zoom? Oh, there you go. Okay. U'ilani's questions as one of the 7 commissioners just has continued to resonate. So I want to share a little bit more about the context from which she's speaking, because maybe if you're not of Hawaii, you've been tracking every single news article, there are many references in there that need a little unpacking. She asked, what is the purpose? What or who is this in service to? And Mokuhinia, Lahaina, there are these narratives that Lahaina was once a lush wetland and it would never have burned. But drought, invasive grasses, fire, high winds during those couple of days, the collapse of plumbing of the water infrastructure as pipes melted at the house connections, depressurized the system and made it impossible to fight. On the other hand, at the same time, certain entities that have been the holders and controllers of 75% of the water use requested of the Water Commission deputy that more water be released for reservoirs at a time when all helicopters were grounded because of high winds. That got amplified into public statements by certain high-ranking political officials that tended to insinuate that kalo farmers who were to be consulted prior to the release of water in the reservoirs were the cause for the massive destruction. What isn't told and what isn't covered and what hasn't been publicly made available is that in 2018 fires, these families lost their homes because they relied completely on the stream to fight fires. That doesn't get covered. And following, I think it was about a week or two after the events themselves, the Kanakoiwi deputy Deputy Kaleo Manuel was deployed by the Attorney General or by the DLNR chair. And again, what isn't made evident is how that happened. But people of the community weren't fooled, and they spoke up because they understood the political landscape in which all of this was happening. Huilani asks, what is the purpose? Who or what is this in service to? And we further ask, whose fantasies in Hawaii or Lahaina or Launiupoko estates are being entertained? Beautiful pictures, right? Infinity pools. I kid you not. Google it. These are the first pictures that show up. Interestingly, people are absent from these views of the infinity pools and invisibilized. But who or what realities must we confront? Because second homeowners are not voters. And we see the landscape of Lahaina that was always dry, but made drier through our activities, through history, through diversions. And this ballpark here, this parking lot, that's the city and county parks, Maluluolele Park, that sits over the former wetland of Mokuhinia and the political center of Moku'ula. This is Kauaula Stream, the stream that would have fed Mokuhinia. And this is the stream at the lower reach. So in what landscapes are these issues, are these fires and conflagrations, political and real and physical, situated in this dry grass that's sort of the legacy of fallowed plantation as large landowners hang on to land and wait till the political processes that hold up their building permits are loosened until the market is right? And the water that's needed to sustain these. These are also situated in an infrastructural and land tenure landscape that takes water from Honokohau, where water is plentiful, across the arid slopes of West Maui, formerly to irrigate sugar, now to irrigate estates, but also to provide the water for the economic engines in this area of tourism. And tourism based on a certain fantasy of what paradise is, what Hawaii is, and especially what Maui is. But right now, in testimony, hours and hours in testimony in the public, because of the attention that has been placed in the area because of the fires, futures are being articulated for the return of the waters, for the return of Maluluolele, for the return and support and expansion of the food cultivation in Kauaula Valley, which supports, as I am told, anytime somebody's birthday, passing, luau, the Palakiko Ohana supports and feeds the family, no charge. It's part of their contract, their social contract with their community. And from what foundations can these reemerge? From this vision of, what is a ballpark now? We have remnants. The water's there, albeit not too clean. There are plans from the 1960s and 70s to do historical restoration from Lahaina, and these are resurfacing. And there is a tremendous amount of community articulations and pressure and aspirations across generations. So with that, I want to pass the torch, but okay.
So first I want to thank Emma and Ms. Ria and all the other folks who put on this fantastic conference, and also mahalo Kaimi and Aurora, my two rock star scholar companions here, for allowing me to join them in this conversation. As a settler of Japanese ancestry whose ancestors endured racism as well as benefited from the US occupation of Hawaii, I have a complicated relationship to the US settler state and to militarism. And so in our initial discussions about a topic for this panel, we wanted to examine how production of certain kinds of knowledge necessitates the production of ignorances. And since my work focuses on militarization, I thought I would approach this theme through the lens of what Teresia Teawa calls militarism, the mutually reinforcing relationship between militarism and tourism. So this is a map of Ke'awalau o Pu'uloa, the many bays of the Long Hill, which is one of the original names for the place that most people today only know as Pearl Harbor. The map was made in 1873 and was one of the earliest and most detailed triangulation maps of the Hawaiian Kingdom. Cartography is a technique of knowledge making that takes a God's eye view of the earth to make certain geographic features legible while invisibilizing others. And this map is very interesting because it also, if you were to zoom way in, you would see the detailed drawings of kalo, banana, and other crops, as well as the lay of loko'ia, the fish ponds that ring this estuary. It gives a sense that this was Aina Momona, a fat or abundant land, fed by the abundant waters and nutrients from 2 mountain ranges, mingling with seawater and bathed in sunlight, a bioreactor to sustain a bounty of life. It was the food basket of Central Oahu. Not coincidentally, the same year that this map was made, US General John Schofield led a scouting expedition to Hawaii masquerading as tourists. Yet he had secret orders to survey the islands for their military utility to the United States. And this is what he reported to his superiors. You could say that Schofield was a pioneer of militarism, where his gaze is oozing with desire and geopolitical calculation, and yet is purposefully ignorant of the sophisticated indigenous biocultural system, which he deems as valueless. I rendered the map as a negative to resemble a blueprint because it would later become the basis for the US plans to construct the naval station at Pearl Harbor. This is foreshadowed by the tangle of numbers here at the bottom of the map, indicating the depth measurements taken by US Navy ships in anticipation of the dredging that would open up the reef to Pu'uloa. Today, most people encounter Pu'uloa like this, as Pearl Harbor, a naval base, a war memorial, and a tourist attraction. It is a very productive ideological factory that naturalizes a US claim to Hawaii. It frames US militarization as necessary and beneficial, casts America's wars as innocent and defensive, and demands an almost religious reverence for the military. We see the militarization of Schofield's vision, where Hawaii would become the fulcrum of US imperial formation, a weaponized island and a gas station, and yet ultimately sacrificable. Hawaii's multicultural settler colonialism formed a Cold War bridge to Asia, the crossroads of the Pacific, and proof that America is not a racist society. I just want to point out the peace sign on this woman's t-shirt. It's pretty interesting. So take a moment to study this slide, and it's a strange photo and bad composition from the point of view of photography, but it contains some very interesting details. In this slide, we can see the toxic Superfund site that Pu'uloa has become. We can see the dispossession of Kanaka Maoli, like this man here who's living literally in the margin between the city park and the federal waters. And of course, there's the military eye of Sauron in the background watching everything. This here is at the Pearl Harbor Memorial Museum, and this is the most controversial line in the whole exhibit. Historians felt that this fact needed to be included, but certain stakeholders groups objected because it cast the United States military in a bad light. So after much deliberation, they settled on this sentence, which is the kind of passive sentence construction you're not supposed to use, right? The Kingdom of Hawaii got itself overthrown. No one did it, it just happened. And it's located in the breezeway between the two main exhibition halls as part of the tropical backdrop. Most people either pass by or they sit with their backs to the plaque. So the controversy of this line is significant because it demonstrates that this fact unsettles the entire foundation of the Pearl Harbor narrative. And in some ignorances are so productive that they must be cast in bronze. So this is a detail from the statue of President William McKinley holding a treaty of annexation that doesn't exist. In 1897, a successful organizing drive by Hawaiian nationals defeated the treaty of annexation in Congress. And yet for 100 years, we were kept ignorant of this fact and instead taught that Hawaii willingly accepted US annexation. The massive underground fuel tanks at Red Hill were classified as secret from its inception in 1940 until 1995. In that time, the Navy claims it does not know the exact number of spills or the quantity of contaminants released. Some estimate that it may have been dozens of spills and anywhere from hundreds of thousands of gallons to over 1 million gallons of fuel. The Navy's willful ignorance of the hydrology of the region and of the behavior of contaminants in the aquifer allowed them to claim that the facility was safe until it wasn't. Despite thousands of people getting sick or complaining about the smell, the Navy continued to gaslight the victims. And here you see a video clip that was leaked to the press, a video that the Navy claimed didn't exist. They said that all their videos were down. This was taken by a worker. And here you also see where a Navy official is trying to claim that this crisis is not actually a crisis because they defined it as such. It may also reflect a cultural feature of the military institution. Fuel tanks and pipelines are like sewage and other necessary but unglamorous infrastructure. They are vital to the operation of the base, but not as sexy as shiny new airplanes, warships, or buildings. And there is a careerism at play where you don't want to be that guy who makes trouble by pointing out problems. So you kick the can down the road to the next person in charge until it blows up on you, which is what happened here. These are 3 reports that don't exist, at least not as public documents according to the military. The first 2 are cultural histories of Makua Valley, where Kanaka Maoli were displaced by the military occupation, and the Army suspended the studies because they did not further the military objectives. And the second report, the third report rather, is concluded that the Army failed to conduct adequate cultural and archaeological studies of areas affected by its Stryker Brigade expansion. These are not secret because they're state secrets or national security matters. These documents represent knowledge that was meant to disappear in the gap between public and private production of knowledge. With the growth of environmental laws and procedures, the privatized knowledge production industry proliferated, like Foucault's incitement to discourse. But here, the military has treated the field of environmental knowledge as a kind of terrain to master. By owning or at least contracting the means of knowledge production, the military can shape that knowledge to its needs. It follows a logic of counterinsurgency, which aims to neutralize opposition. And I just want to end with a note that despite all of the violence caused by the strategic deployment of ignorance, there are always what Foucault calls insurrections of subjugated knowledges. So kipuka are openings into a different state of being, like an island of forest surrounded by lava flow. Hawaiian scholars, Daviana McGregor and Noel Peralta, among others, have theorized kipuka as socio-spatial temporal spaces of Kanaka-Oiwi ontological difference. During the Red Hill crisis, the Kanaka Maoli group, Ka'ohewai, built this ko'a shrine directly in front of the headquarters of the Navy Pacific Fleet Command to call for the protection of the water and to create a gathering place for the water protector movement. So despite what we may claim to know, we must respect the things that we don't know, lest they bite us with our own hubris. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our speakers. This has just been beautiful poetry, and I want to, so we have some time to process, to think, to respond, to ask questions. So I want to start to invite people who have to think about your questions and to start to move to the microphones. But as you are doing that, I want to ask about maybe these 2 figures that really stood out to me. So on the one hand, ignorance, as Kaimi was centering, as Haole ignorance as a source and accelerant of the fires. That was just very, very striking and powerful. And we have so many kinds of ignorance that you have brought out in these discussions: historical amnesia, military innocence at Pearl Harbor, non-existent pretend treaties. That was incredible, striking. And this, statements of passivity in the overthrow of the Hawaiian sovereignty in a move to colonial innocence. And against that, or in tension with that, I think we have what I can just call abundance. And in Uilani's testimony, which I think it will stay with all of us for a long time, the power of her words. And we saw there an abundance of connection, an abundance of evidence, and an abundance of clarity. As she says, from the ash, she sees clearer than she ever has, and Lahaina being a portal into abundance. So I suppose my question is about ignorance and abundance. And as we've seen again and again, it's hard to fight ignorance with abundance. It's difficult to find a crack in innocence and a crack in ignorance where abundance can make an impact. So I wanted to ask you about fighting fire with fire and how you fight ignorance.
I'll go first then. And I think, going back to Uilani, that idea of healing does not happen until you feel safe. And that idea of combating this ignorance, and ignorance used as a political tool, as it has been in Hawaii. Just this past weekend, I found out accidentally that one of those college watchdog websites did a news story on me that read my research and I kind of doxed me, I guess. And it's American, one of those Koch brother DeVos funded websites. Meanwhile, I'm getting a second PhD, but I don't have a tenure track job. I'm not a professor because of the work I do. I'm pretty sure that no matter how many PhDs I get, UH Manoa will never hire me. So I'm an Uber driver of the academy, lecturing, and I'm on that kind of run. But then I wonder if I were a little bit younger, if I didn't already have one PhD in my pocket, what a news article like that would have done to me. Because even telling you now, and even we talked about it before we came here, was I didn't feel safe. Like, I love you all, but I don't know you. And to share this information with people that I don't know got me doxxed last week, I guess. You know what I mean? Like that idea of safety and healing. And so battling ignorance with information is really hard, because when we talk about ignorance and abundance, in a world and a culture and a way of perceiving the world where exile is normal, for people to stay in place and be of place for 1,000 generations back and 1,000 generations of the future is not fathomable. So then these people, their houses burned down, well, they can move. Don't they have a second house with an infinity pool? They can go there, right? That idea of the abundance and the knowledge which comes from staying in place and going deeply is valuable. Not to say that going broadly and traveling across is not valuable, but it's a lack of respect for one and the preference of the other, where again, this idea of displacement and normalizing exile. Like I said, it's this idea for those who normalize exile have this innate desire to belong, but without doing the work of being long in a place. And so I know, or they know, because they must in order to belong without being long. And so that the conflict is the dream of participating in this abundance, in this relationship of land, without doing the work of being where they are, of appreciating those that have been long in the spaces they are. And again, the danger I really feel, and I feel this in my heart, like everybody know, that idea of safety and always playing this game of what's going to come at you as you try. How hard can you push before the monsters lash back out at you and you find yourself crying and scared and your house burned down. But again, like we said, from the ash, that's when things become most clear. Because now I'm at the point in my academic career that it doesn't matter what song I sing, they will never dance to it. So what's the point of trying to change my song? When I think that my song is the one that will bring life back to this space, then I need to keep singing. And I will sing to audiences that vibe with my song and want to dance along. So that, mahalo, answer.
Yeah, I'll just I have a different angle. And I guess part of the way I'm hearing your question is how do we move from that, how do we traverse that arc from ignorance to abundance? I don't see it as a fracture necessarily, but I think it's in the work we all do. As educators and researchers, you combat ignorance with knowledge, but knowledge of what and knowledge of who? And it's, same in geography, it's cartographic representation, what's on the map, what isn't, what's represented, what's invisibilized, and a critical awareness of that, because I think what I've seen, I'm trained as an engineer, then in ecology, hanging out with geographers, and now serving on a commission. What I see on the commission has challenged me to apply what I've learned from political ecologists and to understand and see, not understand, but at least see the landscapes of power, that water moves to power, that power shifts things. And so how do we build knowledge that helps us to see those landscapes of power? And then now that we see the landscapes of power, we have to feel a responsibility to do something, because there's certain people who will once know and then walk away that say, I can't do that. So there needs to be some awareness. Maybe, and this is where I look at the models of the restoration of Lahaina. There's some templates, there's something to work off of, to work towards, to apply that knowledge, to shift power, to create the futures, to create the sort of political landscape that will then allow the futures to be actualized. But we cannot do it through, I'm trained as an engineer, and we cannot do it through engineering. So we need to, but first we need to be able to see it. And I think that's some of the power of what I have learned from colleagues, and also see in testimony, and often serving on, within a bureaucracy, you get to see the recalcitrance of staff who are underpaid in how they view the community. Oh, they're complaining again. Oh, it's testimony. They just made my job harder. They're always complaining. They're not here at the meetings when we're doing the planning. Only the developers who have maybe perhaps paid people on payroll to be at these meetings are there. How come the community doesn't show only until there's a conflict? Well, they're busy working their day jobs. So there isn't a recognition within the state or within, the existing systems of governance that there is this inequity that prevents more equitable power distribution, as if assuming we believe in equitable power distribution. So sorry, I'm going off track, but how do we translate ignorance to abundance is through knowledge, through awareness, to understanding that what needs to change is the landscape of power, and then the willingness and the commitment to see that we are interdependent, and it is our moral obligation and our survival, as you mentioned, to follow through on that, cede some power, engage in relationships that are going to create the space for transformation. That's my 2 cents.
So that's a great question and a difficult one. I guess the way it's framed as sort of fighting one with the other pits it as a kind of a conflict, which it is. And yet I think that sometimes when it's such an asymmetrical balance of power, it's hard to imagine how we do that, which is why I like to think with assemblages and how ignorance is a kind of assemblage and knowledge can be a kind of assemblage, and relationships are also, part of that. And that it can change, a small change in one factor can transform, can create a catalyst that transforms a larger set of relations in the whole assemblage. And I studied that in the Kaho'olawe struggle, where you had a small group of Hawaiian activists, land on an island to protest the Navy bombing, the most powerful military in the whole world. And somehow they were able to shift the whole assemblage of politics, of affect, of knowledge around this island, that it now became possible, that became a place that could be saved and that needed to be saved, and that would provide a resource for regenerating the lahui, for regenerating cultural practice, life, and a future, a different kind of future. So I guess I'm trying to think of maybe a little bit of magical solutions. It's like how we change the element that can transform. And sometimes it's a contingent thing, right? It was one boat out of dozens that tried to get to the island, one that didn't turn around when the Coast Guard threatened them, 9 people that went on that boat, landed on the island, 2 that wandered off for several days, which wasn't in the plan, and then got picked up by the military. And in that process, the island called them into a different kind of relationship, and they changed. And their change transformed everyone else's understanding of what was possible. So I don't know how you plot that out. I don't know how you do it in a scientific way, but sometimes there's those moments that are catalysts, that are transformative. And I've seen that in other situations, even with the Mauna and that struggle. So we don't have, I think we need to prepare and do all the kind of the steady grunt work of education and building and organizing, but also be ready for those moments when an opening does happen, and then you move through that portal, right? You move through that puka and create something different.
I want to riff off of that, because I'm aware the audience may or may not know much about Red Hill, but one of the I think the moments where that happened was the minute jet fuel started coming out of people's taps was a moment that catalyzed everyone in Honolulu together in shock. And it immediately shifted the dynamics of what politicians and regulators were suddenly willing to do. In October, they were unwilling to do anything. On December 2nd, they were all in disbelief and trying to distance themselves from the most, I think the military is the biggest economic driver on Oahu, right? Next
to tourism.
Next to tourism, it's that, but the biggest economic driver. And so that created a completely different situation. Now, what has happened from it, that's still unfolding, but it mobilized people together in a way and created kind of new coalitions and alliances.
I think even with that, you have, again, going this idea of ignorance and abundance and deep and broad knowledge. I think initially, anyone ever read the book on bullshit and the difference between bullshit and a lie? So a bullshitter is someone that says whatever they want. A just because to make themselves look good or to whatever convey a narrative. But a liar knows what the truth is and purposely plants information such that the truth not be discovered. And with the Red Hill, until the water was coming out of the tap, and even while the water was coming out, the jet fuel was coming out of the tap, they're like, it's fine. And so that idea of bullshit and lying, as it's dancing in this world, but in a world where, and a perspective, especially from the military and tourism, same thing, militarism, is that exile and displacement is normal. It's normal to travel. It's normal to live somewhere else. Oh, you have poison, you want to go get a new house, right? You poison an island. The island is poison. You cannot unjet fuel a well. And so, again, the ignorance and abundance, that it's not lovely to think that gravity does what gravity does, and that this water, this jet fuel, will do what it needs to do. It doesn't know that today's a holiday celebrating Veterans Day. They don't know that, and it continues to move. And what we attend to and what we don't attend to, yeah, like you're saying about pukas, I like to make fish nets or just kind of nets. It's kind of fun. But someone says, oh, you're making knots. And I go, I'm not making knots, I'm making holes. Because I pay attention to the hole. I don't pay attention to the string. I make sure that it's even, right? And it's purposeful. And each knot, while purposefully made, each hole is also carefully constructed. And so what we attend and what we do not attend to, what's put on our television screens, what's put in front of you is on purpose. But what's missing is also on purpose. And I think, yeah, in that idea of what do we do? And yeah, it's an increase in knowledge, but I think it's increasing the knowledge of the whole, while also learning how to make new knots of cordage that belongs here kind of deal. You know what I mean? Like it's this attending to knowing, but attending to how knowing makes things unknown and thereby doing it purposefully. But yeah, fun game, good question.
Yeah.
So, Kaimi, when you were talking about the knots and the holes, yeah, so generative, it actually reminds me of from an aspect of Indigenous knowledge in Australia, so where I'm from, as a settler, that is becoming quite well known in Australia, and it's from Indigenous astronomy, which is that the Western way of looking at the southern sky is to look at the stars and the constellations, but Indigenous astronomy looks at the dark places. So the idea of the dark emu in the sky, which is the Indigenous way of thinking about the Milky Way from the southern sky. So that leads to a question that's been asked through the chat from Warwick Anderson. So, and I think I'll ask it for Warwick, who is one of our Banal Prize winners, who will be speaking later, and then we will have, after that, Joan's question, Joan Fujimura, our other Banal Prize winner. So Warwick's question is about alliances between different Indigenous people. What opportunities or impediments do you see for alliance with other Indigenous peoples who face similar challenges from settler colonialism and global capitalism?
I'll buy you some time, Kaimi. So I'll just share, I recently worked on a waterback paper with Kelsey Leonard and about a dozen other Indigenous scholars. And part of it is because we are often so grounded in our place and knowledges, it gets difficult to find emergent themes without sliding into pan-indigeneity. And the specificity of our settings and locales is what I think makes our analyses rigorous and relevant to practice, which is usually why Indigenous scholars, in my experience, are doing the work. It's not to write papers, it's to have impact in our communities. So then it gets difficult to understand, like, how do we, how do we sort of amplify and unify and create those coalitions? We have to have like a common purpose that is bigger than our immediate communities. And so what I'm starting to move into is conversations with someone at Western Australia about Indigenous groundwater, but we haven't had some of those networking opportunities because many people want to work in their home communities, but because of Zoom and maybe allies helping us make some of those bridges, it's becoming more possible in the spaces that I work in, water. And I'm trying to remember what the original question was and whether I got
No, you answered
back
it,
to
definitely.
that. But it's a work in progress for me.
Let me jump in. Okay, thank you for I had to look up one word. When I teach like that idea, the danger of pan-indigeneity, I think, yeah, words mean things. I should also, I do philosophy, but I also do science. So I'm like based in Mo'olelo, but can do calculus, kind of kid, that kind of sits in this unique space to see things. But paying attention to philosophy is an idea that words mean things. And then again, when we talk about ignorance and abundance, I mean, the fact that I'm currently able to speak to you here with an accent, which can be perceived as possibly coming from the North American continent, while firmly situated on an island in the middle of the Pacific, is kind of a big thing to pay attention to. Like, how the hell does that happen, right? Because there are spaces that are contingent, like they're right next to each other, like the border of Mexico and the US, where the ability to speak English or the ability to speak Spanish, how did Spanish end up there? I mean, all these questions of even the languages that we're using to communicate now is a knot, but also a whole, if we don't consider where they're at. And so words mean things, and the danger of pan-indigeneity and working with Indigenous peoples and that idea, the definition of Indigenous according to the UN is kind of an important one, because it starts with Indigenous peoples are inheritors and practitioners of unique cultures and ways of relating to people and the environment. You don't think French people have a unique way of relating to the environment? Their culture not unique. What about Germans, the Greeks? You know what I mean? The George Bush, or what is the guy, Biden? Like, they all come from unique cultures, and they're inheritors of the practitioners of these uniquenesses relating to people and environment. The thing that makes us Indigenous is that we are minoritized in our ancestral homeland. So the only thing that is the same is that we're being screwed. You know what I mean? Like, I go, so then, in this idea of working, power works differently in different vessels, right? It's liquid. I go, it's like the Pokemon Ditto. It can change whatever shape and have whatever power it needs in different spaces, which just makes it a powerful Pokemon to play. But in working together, it sometimes is important to recognize the danger of that word, that we are not the same, and to appreciate that unsameness. Personally, in the current era of my life, again, I'm in my ocean sciences era. It's important for me to work with other Pacific Islands people, just because as sciences work, and if you go to one of these conferences, you'll have all these thousands of people like you have right now, and there'll be 5 Pacific Islanders, right? And so these 5 Pacific Islanders are super focused on climate change and not drowning, and hey, drinking some water, and how about let's have some food sovereignty and stop shipping stuff in. And we don't need more plantation agriculture, we need restorative agriculture. So those 5 scientists amongst these thousands of scientists are working on something that is really, really important to us, sometimes belonging to these larger conferences that aren't Pacific Island specific, allows for a conversation that is super necessary to be drowned out. And so even then, like, as we're studying, and this is a social study of science, I go, in the Pacific, and I'm gonna just say specifically for the Pacific. When you think of a seed, I go, science is an invasive species that landed on Pacific Islands and sucked up all the resources, sucked up all the water, took up all the sun, and silenced the native ways of knowing beneath it. And right now, we need to ground ourselves in our ways of knowing. Not to say that we cannot reach to other ways of knowing, but there's a difference between a canoe plant that can come on a canoe and grow happily with everyone else. And there's a difference between a invasive species and the way that power works. And when I work with, again, other Pacific people, I focus on the Pacific ways of knowing and then reaching out, recognizing that a literacy of atoll is a different literacy than mountainous island, an appreciation for that, an appreciation that we have different values, different ways of knowing, different signs and symbols in order to figure those literacies out. But once upon a time, there was a literacy of Pacific people that no matter what you landed on, within 10 days, you figured out how to create a happy home. And that we need to get to that. And I think that science right now is in the way of that. That was the answer.
I'm gonna argue with you, but there's somebody also waiting. I'm gonna say and I've written on this from Mauna Kea, but there's a culture of science that has, been part of that, but it doesn't need to be.
No,
and
but
that's why these kind of conversations are really important.
I would disagree because, again,
How
we're
are you-
doing things because
how are you
the
defining
history of
science again?
No, because the history of science, where did science come from? It came from the Enlightenment and the schism, right? That separated science as a way of knowing and
So I don't
spirituality as a way
define
of knowing.
science that way.
But then whose word is it?
Oh, words,
not a
semantics.
Hawaii
This
word.
is why I'm an engineer.
No, Aurora, this is such an important question to STS and to many of us here. So how do you define science?
So I'm an empiricist, and then, the science I've been trained in, and I understand that I have blinders, so this is why it's fun to talk and get challenged. And but for the science I'm trained in, quantification is important. That's annoying, but it is part of that practice. And empiricism is important, but I also think there's inherent weakness in science that I practice. We don't have the technology to measure certain things yet, and there's a failure to recognize that our tools are limited, but the realities that people may share in a qualitative study are real too. So I think there's a hubris in the science that I've been trained in, that it has the answers. And I drank the Kool-Aid for many years. So, but the way I navigate forward is that, if I am going to recruit students into science, technology, engineering, and math, the culture of science, technology, and engineering and math needs to change for it to be a hospitable place for the students I work with, because it has not been. It's a hostile space for many people who are not, representing, kind of not, I'll just say, like, don't look like the stereotype of white male science. And so I guess I still believe that and that's my belief system. I still believe that there's potential and power because I have seen what the tools can provide, but I don't think they've always been wielded in a certain way because of who funds it. And you see this in agricultural research versus who pays for restorative agriculture. Nobody, it's organic farmers experimenting or nonprofits, but who pays for, just go to North Shore, like who's paying for all the ag lands and who's paying those leases is Syngenta and Monsanto and, big ag doing seed corn research out in the Pacific where your pollen won't get, cross over into corn farmers' fields. So there's power structures that need to shift and cultures within how we do science that need to shift. And it's going to take time, but deliberate attention and intention. And I think representation's part of it, but it's not enough. So I I have seen what tools wielded appropriately can do for communities in terms of understanding their natural resources. I've met people who are doing incredible work to look at mercury and fish in the Midwest, in relation to tribal sovereignty. And it can be a tool, but it's not the end all be all. So I don't write it off, I guess.
Can I add one little bit?
That's good.
Thanks. So just to get back to the question, and more from a practical and strategic perspective, I think, and acknowledging the pitfalls of pan-indigeneity and sort of flattening everything. But there has been really important solidarities built between Kanaka Maoli movements and other indigenous struggles. So you notice the land back flag here. Activists from Hawaii went to Standing Rock, helped them with their occupation, learned, brought them out to Hawaii. They taught and helped folks here. And so that kind of movement back and forth is maybe more archipelagic than sort of sort of mass movement building, because it allows for the diversity to also exist in relation. And so it's like the knots, tying the knots, right, that can kind of hold it together and make sure the space is even. So I just wanted to mention that. Thanks.
I do want to return to this question of what is Indigenous science, what is Kanaka Maoli science, what is decolonial science. So think about that, because we want to know what you think. But Joan.
This is just so amazing. Thank you so much. And that's all I, came here to say. I was born and raised on Kauai, and in high school, we noticed that my cousin and I tried to stop the military. We were very young. We were so ignorant, we knew nothing. But we saw that our classmates were getting really strange cancers, and these are young people. So we started to do some investigating, and we found out about the military testing Agent Orange on Wailua River because of the similar flora to Vietnam. And then they buried huge metal containers of Agent Orange in Wailua in the hills. And eventually it's going to get down to the water table. So it's rust. That's what happens in Hawaii. It rusts. So we started to do this, and we tried to sue the military. And we didn't get very far, in part because we just didn't know how to do it. And there were other, and now, of course, Monsanto is doing it. It's, poisoning the land where my grandnephews go to school. And it changes my favorite waterfall no longer exists because they've taken all the water. So I only want to say thank you so much. I wish I could have stuck with it when I was in high school and all the way through. I ended up fighting other battles, but I come here and I listen to what you're doing, and I know that there's hope because you're doing it. And I volunteer. Any work you need done, I volunteer, because.
Talk afterwards.
Let's
talk. Thank you. Other questions? Well, I just thank you for sharing that. And I would love to talk with you more to learn about what you folks did back then. I know that issue has been just sort of festering for a long time, including some workers who got sprayed and died of cancers, and they never got, I think, appropriately compensated or apologized to. And it's just one of, I counted about 1,000 military contamination sites in the islands. So we have a lot of work to do, but thank you.
Thank you so much for those presentations. They were just so incredibly powerful. I wanted to ask you about the role of Kanaka Maoli scientists. And I'm asking this question because when we were fighting against Mauna Kea, we were trying to get hydrologists to testify that the construction of the TMT threatens the aquifer, but the hydrologists are all employed by the state. So it was very difficult to find a hydrologist who would testify. We were able to find a Kanaka Maoli cultural practitioner, Ku'ule Kanahele, who testified in terms of Kanaka Maoli science that Mauna Kea is a pahuvai, and it's a container of water. More recently, like Ernie Lau coming forward as an engineer, as an engineer and as the director of the Board of Water Supply, he comes forward and he's testifying against the state, or more against the military, I guess I would say. Could you talk a little bit more about Kanaka Maoli scientific knowledges? Jerry Konanui says that all kalo farmers are hydrologists, soil scientists, they are meteorologists, they are botanists, they are all of these, they incorporate all these different kinds of science in the daily work that they do. And I'm also thinking of, Rosie Allegado saying that sea level rise is not an antagonistic force, but it's really about the return of Kanaloa, and how are we to greet the deity of the deep consciousness of the ocean. So there are all of these ways of thinking about Kanaka Maoli science, and I was wondering if you could talk in your capacities, and you, Aurora, I think it's just amazing that you're an engineer and a hydrologist, and you're on the Commission of Water Resources Management, which is incredibly important to all of us, to feel that there's some representation of Kanaka Maoli science on that body. But could you talk about that a little bit more? Like all of you, I'd love to hear more about what you think.
Oh, I feel like you're talking to me, right? So I don't want to define Kanaka Maoli sciences, but I'll just say my working definition is, I agree with Uncle Jerry, and Uncle Jerry is Konanui, who is, for those of you who may not aware, like he sort of a walking encyclopedia of kalo, taro, colocasia esculenta, cultivar diversity, and he taught many, many, many people, and he was just so inspiring. He inspired me because farmers, in my way of thinking, farmers, fishers, they're scientists, they're practitioners, they integrate information, they take in empirical information, and then they have to do the next step of applying it to a practice that then supports their livelihood. So to me, it's a higher level of sort of scientific synthesis and information assimilation and assimilation, synthesis, and application. But, as someone, as Kanaka Maoli, who's trained in mainstream sciences, there's another definition that gets sort of placed upon us. And so I'm losing it, where the thread was. I think I was encouraged to apply to serve on the commission as a postdoc, and basically postdocs are virtually semi-employed, unemployed, and a lecturer at the time. And it's an uncompensated position. But what I have noticed serving, and I followed Kamana Beamer before me, is that, what drives us to be there and serve is a commitment to the community and understanding that that body has power, has authority to influence and potentially, have to watch out, this is being streamed, but potentially restore and fix a lot of the problems that haven't been addressed for many, many decades, even since the writing of the State Water Code, and the Constitution, which state in Hawaii water is a public trust. And it outlines many of these details that actually are in support of land and people, the public, and the environment, but have not been enforced because of who ends up on this governing body. So I think it's as trained as a scientist, I'm able to take in information that the very technical staff provide in a way that people who maybe were working in finance sectors of a large company or did more land management don't understand Q90, Q50. They don't understand some of the technical details and they're very impatient about it. But some of those technical details, say when it comes to like total petroleum hydrocarbon detections in water samples, like you have to look at the details. And so I have found it to be very, very helpful to have that technical training so that when I read a report, I can read it with understanding, not ignorance, and see the holes in the claims made versus the evidence provided. But then my moral compass is guided by that commitment to community that does come with being part of a place, maybe it's Kanaka Maoli, but also it's being Kama'aina, it's being, committed to and of Hawaii or of wherever someone is. And that, with Deputy Manuel too, is like that commitment makes us work like way more hours in the week than the average person who clocks out at 5. Not saying the staff are amazing, but they're limited in their ability to connect with practitioners because it's a different language and it's a different way of seeing. And I think there could be more work to work on that, but it's a slow process.
And then I'm going to jump in now because I go, no one will ever consider me a scientist, but I jump and dance in the sciences and I do that work and I can do that work and engage with that work. But I'm firmly grounded in possibly a different way of knowing that sees that as an alternative way of knowing, but understanding that the way that it puts borders and walls upon, soil scientist versus a herbologist versus a plant pathologist, and separates it and seeing it as a system. What if I told you the ocean doesn't begin and end with sand and then isn't always liquid? That the border of the ocean doesn't begin and end with salt water. There's a whole different way of perspective of seeing the world and applying different boundaries to what those things are. So understanding that science as science implements and comes with it a particular way, and I would say a continental way of separating boundaries of worlds, of fields, of areas. And I think when you're talking about like indigenizing science or like decolonizing science, science is science. And science, again, is accepting it as a particularly unique way of perceiving the world that has its roots and its origins from a particular space. And that, with outside of science and outside of that training, there are unique, different ways of understanding systems and relationships between systems that present for alternative ways of understanding and broader ways of understanding the world. So in the dance between the two, I think that by looking only through one, you limit. By being open to all, you create, I'm not sure if it's better, but unique opportunities to possibly imagine differently. And I'm gonna say, European philosophies and understanding the world weren't very sustainable in Europe and then moved out and across the globe. So accepting science for what science is and looking at that word, adding adjectives before it or after it is not going to change what science is. So perhaps in our understanding of systems and understanding of relationships with space and the universe which we all are a part of, is creating spaces for different words, new words, because the word Hawaiian is a haole word. So you can make something Hawaiian, a pizza Hawaiian, by putting a pineapple on it, right? That's their word. Who am I to argue with a word that is not Hawaii? I can put a pineapple on each one of you, and now you are Hawaiian. So says Domino's Pizza. Right? So that idea of who defines words is important and how they're defined and their histories are important. And so what words we use, I think is for me what I attend to as I play the game. So I will never be a scientist in the same way that I don't like wearing the word indigenous, because I don't want to wear a scar. I imagine a possibility. If I define and I see myself only as indigenous person, what happens in a free Hawaii? without US occupation. I just lost my whole identity. Yeah, I'm Hawaii, a person from Hawaii, native, been here 1,000 generations back, be here 1,000 generations in the future. Mahalo.
So I want to bring in the D as a prefix. So in science as a scar or science as a wound, that's really, really powerful, Kaimi. And obviously you and Aurora have a different experience and a different orientation to that. So I wanted to ask about decolonial science, which is something that a lot of people in STS are committed to, and also, Kyle, detours, like the D is DE, I don't know if you can understand my accent, is something that you're also, committed to in certain ways. So is, whether or not there is an Indigenous science, that's obviously something that we've debated, but what about a decolonial science? Or a D anything? Can we D?
Can we D?
Yeah.
Gosh. Well, I think about like decolonize is not a metaphor as a starting point, right? And that it has to work towards reclaiming lands, reclaiming sovereignty, and the other way that the D works in our detours, it was just a way of shortening our name, but think about the situationists and the détournement, the way that they would appropriate something and turn it into another use. That struck me as something helpful to think about, like can something like science or a tour be turned into a practice that undoes some of the harm that had been done? I don't know that I'm convinced that it can. At least with tourism, it's such a hard, like Hawaii is so over-determined by that story that even when we've tried to organize a detour that would have folks come and learn from being in relation with community folks. There was an article written in the San Francisco newspaper that basically trashed the itinerary as like, you don't have to go through a tour to do this thing. You can do it yourself and think for yourself. So it's almost like, yeah, Hawaii belongs to them, right? Hawaii's already determined as a possession of that militaristic gaze. So that, yeah, I don't know if the detour works. We just do it because we need to do that with our partners that we're going to work with. In order to work with them, we need to have some kind of foundation of understanding. And that's why it got started, and it's kind of grown now. But I don't know how to talk about it in terms of science. Maybe one of you might.
Oh, I'm ready. I am ready.
I might actually be on the same page as you on some of this. Like the way I come to, decolonizing is, reading Tuhi Y. Smith, but also thinking that part of the problem of the word decolonizing is that it centers the colonizer. So following the Maori and this Graham Smith and writing in education, like really it's about centering the Maori or centering, what is for you, it's centering Hawaii, because we are giving all this energy, we're creating the binary and then focusing on the other rather than growing what needs to be cultivated. And so I work with plants, if all you do is pull out weeds, like my grandmother, you're gonna prune everything to death and still not have a garden. You have to create the spaces for growth. And that is about centering what it is you're trying to grow, while still attending to the threats, but not giving too much attention. So others, have written, Greg Kahete, have written on Indigenous science. And for me, it's, I'm an engineer initially by training, and I'm less caught up in words and more, does it work? If it works, then I don't need to name it, but it's good. If it works, it's good, and if it's not, then I can trash it and move on. So I don't, but I do think I have struggled with the word decolonizing because of the heavy emphasis on the colonizer.
See, and yes, agree, because a D something speaks into an existence and not something, but in doing so highlights the something. And so it aims for a goal that is not something, does not mean that it's aiming for a goal that is a Hawaii something. Mm-hmm. Like decolonize, run away. Where are you running?
What?
I don't know, into a wall, into a pit. Like just because you're running away doesn't mean that you're running to. And I think for Pacific people and for Hawaii, like you don't just jump on a canoe and cross your fingers, right? You navigate toward a something, right? Like that's important. It's on purpose. It's done with purpose. So to just decolonize is just to what you undoing? On everything, right? So that idea of you don't just you navigate to. And so for Hawaii, then I don't use those words. I use ho'o Hawaii and ho'o haole. And so ho'o haole is to cause dissonance, to cause something to be foreign, even to its own self, right? This idea of foreign. But to ho'o Hawaii is to situate it in this space and make it resonant to these spaces. And so it's the words mean things, and like science has a thing, Hawaiian as a haole word has a thing, D something. I'm not sure if it works because I don't know where you're going to, except for not here, right? And so it's like if we're not navigating towards something, then what are you teaching? I don't know.
I want to add a little bit too. I've realized over the years that there's two different conversations. If it's someone, sorry, I'm going to use the word indigenous, talking about decolonizing their practice or their pedagogy or, decolonizing something. And then if it's someone who's identifies as ally or accomplice, they're seeking different objectives. And I don't know how to attend to that other conversation. I only know how to attend to how I am trying to enact science or research or teaching in a way that is true to my values. But I think it does come back to what are those values? What's the objective? And is it liberation? Is it equity? What are we aiming for? And in Hawaii, it's often abundance. We want well-being, health, and those kind of bigger conversations need to happen before you start using tools without having a plan for what you're gonna create, right? So.
Maybe you need a defense team and an offense team, right?
No more fences.
The D to take down the stuff that makes it oppressive, right? Like how do you deconstruct it and create the space for Hawaii something?
Yeah, but that's why it's the language that you use as well, right? That language itself limits your abilities of what is possible because then it only has a particular vocabulary. And then so when you think of this idea of literacy of Hawaii space, without using Hawaii's language and the sounds that came from it and were inspired by it, I think from a European perspective, you read the Bible and then that became a duck and that became a sheep and that became, and they named it. In Hawaii, everything names itself. And names are a powerful bond that gives purpose and meaning and sound into in a body and in an idea. And that idea of that sound, and sound has resonance. And so in speaking the sound, you speak it into being by calling a Hawaii thing America. You silenced one and amplified another. And so, I don't know. That's why for me, it's this idea of words, but even in communicating, languages limit. And certain, in the same way that the language of science and those boundaries and borders and walls limit alternative perspectives of perceiving things. And so like open science is I'm going to speak chair in English. You know what I mean? Like it's, I don't know, that's where I'm at.
We need more pluralism, epistemological pluralism. Maybe
Yeah,
and conversations about that, perhaps. I mean,
And I think we need a science of abundance, and I think we need a STS of abundance. And it's been quite extraordinary to hear your voices resonating in this space, and I think will stay with us for a long time and resonate through our work and through this conference, and as we all go return to wherever we are dwelling. So, yeah, as you can tell from my cadence, we're coming to an end. I do want to say that Aurora's lab is open to be supported. And I'm pretty sure that we have the information in the program, but we will also tweet it out following this session, because her work is really amazing, and through the UH Foundation you can support her work, her scientific work, and thank you.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah.
So we have a lunch break now, and we are then coming back. We have a prize session at 3:40, and the banquet later on. There are still tickets if you want to come. Did you want to make an announcement?
I just want to make a comment. Thank you. Mahalo, everybody. I just want to make a comment just from the standpoint of one attending the 4S meetings. I work very closely with Indigenous peoples in Canada. Aloha Aina is a powerful thing. And I just want to congratulate Emma Kaval and the organizing committee for centering all of the plenaries on Kanaka Maoli, Kanaka Oiwi practices and politics, your struggle for sovereignty, and know that there are allies here who want to work on the very questions you were just arguing through right there. That was beautiful. Thank you very much. Hello.
Fun.
I'm gonna, so if we found